better luck with a video camera.
There's a red light.
That seems like it's recording.
It's recording.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello,
So, what's your name?
Doug Mader,
Doug Mader, that's fantastic.
Melissa's dad.
Yes. So, do you know what cultural generations are?
I haven't heard exactly that phrase, but I suppose people of different ages have different ways of looking at the world.
Yes. So, do you know what cultural generation you would be classified as? When were you born?
1959, so it's toward the end of the baby boomers, but not at the very end of them.
But you were a baby boomer.
Definitely a baby boomer, 1947 to 1964.
You also had two older siblings who were baby boomers, so you were raised in a baby boomer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what kind of marriages were most prominent when you were growing up?
Well, nuclear families, mom, dad, and biological kids. 2 or 3 kids was pretty common.
2 or 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
Families were not multiracial for the most part. Whites married whites and so forth. Tended to marry within their own religion to a large extent, not entirely. What was the question?
What kind of marriages were most prominent growing up?
Women of my mother's generation, she had a 4-year college degree, and most of her sisters had degrees of some sort. They all went to college, but many of them, including my mom, stopped working to raise children. And that was a big factor. Dad was the sole breadwinner for many years. And when Mom went back to work, she was kind of had fallen behind in the workplace because she hadn't been in the workplace for 15 years or so.
Your mom went back to work?
Absolutely.
When?
After the first 2 boys had left the home, gone to college. She had started working while I was still in high school. I was the youngest of the 3. And she ended up having 21 or 22 years of federal government service. So she got a good pension from that.
So you said that your 2 older brothers moved away from the home, right?
They graduated high school, went to college, and that was kind of it for them living at home.
So what was like the hallmark of being an adult? Like being a grown-up when you were grown?
Well, there's pretty much an expectation that we'd go to college. We had that opportunity. And get a job and move out and be on our own, financially independent. It didn't happen in a day. It was a process.
So when were children expected to have been moved out and financially independent?
There wasn't as much boomerang kids. That expression came along kind of after our time. Kids would come back and live at home during the summers of college, but not so much so after graduation. My older brother died shortly after he graduated, so that was very sad. We don't have him to look at. My other older brother pretty much never moved back home after he left high school for college. And I came back for months at a time, but not years.
Mm-hmm. So when you were younger, did your parents allow you to date?
Yes. That was something the older brother had to break the ice with my parents in terms of dating and stuff. So I had it easier because I held older brothers, and they had sort of softened my parents up to new ways of thinking and having girls over and even spending the night, heaven forbid.
Mm-hmm. So what were your parents' expectations for your future lifetime partner?
My parents had one marriage each, just to each other, and they remained married till Dad died, so 56, 57 years. It's a long marriage. And I think they saw and see that as a job well done, and a good marriage lasts until death do us part, and they hope for that for their children, and that's what's happening with my brother and myself.
What were their expectations for your future family?
Ideally, we would have kids with our wives, you know. There haven't been any adoptions in our family. We had more kids than any of Mom's siblings. Mom was one of 11 children or 9 children that grew up, and none of her kids had big families. She was the only one that had 3. So I think we were probably expected to have 2 or 3 kids. That was my impression. My brother had 4. The third pregnancy was twins, so I don't think they would have had four kids otherwise.
Mm. So do you know what cohabitation is?
In this context, I think that's living together outside of marriage or before marriage, right?
Yeah. So how was cohabitation viewed?
That was kind of a new thing on the horizon, and earlier on it was much less viewed positively. And over time it got to be more and more viewed positively. The commitment that the couple had was always an important factor. Living together was one thing, but were they living together because two can live as cheap as one, or because they really were serious about each other and they were trying it out? I think it was looked on more favorably if the relationship seemed more secure and long-term, and less favorably if it was just a matter of convenience or, you know, shacking up because it was fun.
Mm-hmm. What about unmarried parenting?
Well, you know, there's the old saying, love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage. You can't have one without the other.
I've never heard that before.
I can sing it for you. First comes love, second comes marriage, then comes the baby in a baby carriage.
Oh, yeah.
Very old-fashioned, but that's how we were brought up. I think that was the way my parents wanted things, and that's the way things were. I was married for 10 years before we had kids.
Mm-hmm.
Mom is a big proponent of Planned Parenthood. Has contributed a lot of the time for that. She worked for Planned Parenthood. She helped women with their family planning issues. You know, the rights of women, and the pill came out in 1960s. That was a big thing for my parents. Seeing that happen, it didn't exist for them, but it started to exist.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't shy about teaching kids about reproductive health. And
your parents specifically?
Yeah, they belonged to a church that supported a sex ed program. You know, a lot of churches either taught abstinence or didn't teach anything about sexuality. Not our church. Our church was more, felt like they were more in the real world, and let's give people information, not just tell them what to do.
Yeah. What was your relationship with your parents like?
Well, Dad worked a lot during the week. I got to see him evenings and weekends. I got to see him more than my brothers did because he quit his job. My oldest brother was in high school. He went through a transition and ended up working from home, starting when I was in high school. So I got to see him on a daily basis more then. The kids were mostly raised by Mom. My dad did help at the nursery school a little, which was kind of unusual for dads. It's still somewhat unusual, but less so. We went on family vacations. They were very important. We were a close-knit family. Church was a big part of our life.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think has changed most between then and now?
Things seem much more diverse. you have people from all over the world in Montgomery County. Couples seem to be more diverse. You see mixed race couples on television. It's on Ad Today. You know, mother was white, father was black, and the kids were somewhere in the middle. That was a little more shocking when I was growing up. The whole gay and lesbian same-sex marriage thing is a new thing that's occurred. That didn't exist. Polyamory is on the periphery, and some people are starting to see it as a possibility, although that's not mainstream yet. Hard to see that becoming mainstream. Who would have thought that same-sex marriage would become the law of the land?
So can you describe an average day in the life of 24-year-old Doug Maynor?
24-year-old. So I would have graduated from... 24 was an interesting year because that was 1983. And I'd graduated college, and the Peace Corps turned me down, so I had to figure out what to do, and my feeling was get the heck out of the East Coast and go west, go as far west as I could. So a typical day when I was 24, I was struggling to make a living in San Francisco, California. It was before I met my wife, so yeah, that was an interesting year. I worked at the Blind Babies, raising money for the Blind Babies Foundation. As a telephone solicitor, it was a terrible job.